It was 3 o'clock in the morning when Captain Ibrahim Traoré's encrypted phone buzzed urgently. The line was one known only to a select few within Burkina Faso's military hierarchy. "Sir, the coup has begun." General Dumbier is advancing with the 3rd Battalion, gazing through the window of his modest quarters. In the distance, dim headlights crept through the silent city, armored vehicles moving in formation.
The trail cut deeper.
This was no drill. Was the identity of its orchestrator, General Maurice Dumbier, a man Traoré had considered a brother-in-arms, his closest ally since military academy, now turned traitor. But this was not a moment for grief.
Without hesitation,
Traoré activated Protocol Omega, a contingency plan known only to his innermost circle. As he swiftly changed into plain civilian clothes, memories of a recent intelligence briefing resurfaced. French operatives had been in contact with Dumbier. Offers had been made, promises exchanged. In return for facilitating a regime change, Dumbier would receive French backing, wealth, and power. In exchange for reversing Traoré immediately, Traoré had made a bold decision: let the betrayal unfold. Just enough to expose Ibrahim Traoré slipped away, under the cover of darkness, into a secure vehicle. Major Sankara drove in silence, avoiding known convoy routes. They arrived at a hidden underground command center, where loyal officers were already coordinating intricate tactics involving brute force. Traoré's strategy was surgical. Ammunition in Dumbier's battalion had been secretly swapped with blanks. Communication channels had been silently tapped. Loyalist forces had surrounded the city's key checkpoints under the presidential palace. Traoré launched the second phase, unleashing damning evidence. At 6 a.m., while national radio broadcasted Dumbier's announcement of a military transition, citizens began receiving messages, intercepted calls, financial records, photographs. The truth hit like a thunderbolt. Dumbier was working hand in glove with French intelligence to reinstall foreign control over Burkina Faso's gold land. Chaos erupted. Dumbier's communications with the French embassy went dark. His own men began to question his intentions. Many surrendered. Some even joined Traoré's ranks. By mid-morning, it was no longer a coup. It was a failed betrayal, then strike.
By truth.
But Traoré didn't seek revenge. Instead, he sought clarity, for himself and for the nation. General Dumbier was not executed nor paraded in disgrace. He was brought to the national stadium under full security for a public confrontation. Military uniform, without rank, faced Dumbier across a table. "For 15 years we served together," he said. "You tried to remove me today. I want to know why." Not for me, was momentarily disarmed by the sincerity of the question. He justified his actions by pointing to Traoré's refusal to cooperate with the West. "You've isolated us," he said.
Responded
"We
calmly,
can't survive like this." You mistook sovereignty for isolation. You thought freedom came with conditions. You were wrong. He then revealed the true will of the people, not to be governed by foreign dictate, but by dignity, self-powerful, their eyes reflecting the weight of the moment. The evidence of betrayal had been laid bare, but what remained was not vengeance. That day sent a message far beyond Burkina Faso. From Mali to Chad, leaders began re-evaluating foreign entanglements. It was no longer just about military might.
Standing before
it was
young
about
cadets
moral
weeks
authority.
later,
Traoré summed it all up in
independence
one sentence: is the belief that we cannot stand alone. At 3 a.m. in Ouagadougou, while the city slept, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's phone lit up with a call that would change everything. "Sir, the coup has begun." Just like that, his most trusted general was coming to kill him. Tanks in the streets, lights dimmed, soldiers brainwashed, a friend turned traitor. But here's the twist: they didn't know Traoré was ready. He'd seen it coming. The man sent to overthrow him would be a prisoner of his own troops. This story isn't fiction, it's real. Like if you believe truth defeats betrayal. Subscribe if you stand for African nation can still stand tall against global giants. If you believe Africa deserves to write its own story in its own voice on its own terms. If you see that fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and feel it burn in your chest too, then subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to walk beside us. together through a rising wave of awakening. The whispers are over. This is the quiet storm. Just days before the coup, intelligence intercepted secret communications. General Maurice Dumbier, Traoré's closest ally, his brother-in-arms, was plotting with French operatives. In exchange for power, he had agreed to reverse every reform. Then Traoré made a cold, calculated choice. Wait, watch. Let the enemy reveal himself completely. The betrayal cut deep, but this was no time for emotion.
Tanks rolled through
It was time for
Ouagadougou.
strategy. Under the night sky, Traoré vanished through a hidden tunnel beneath the palace. He wasn't fleeing, he was repositioning. His car slipped through back alleys, avoiding Dumbier's troops. He reached a secret underground command center. There, surrounded by loyal officers, he activated Phase 1 of a plan only 5 men in the country knew existed. He wasn't caught off guard.
Broadcasted a
He had
victory
been waiting for
speech,
this.
thinking
Thinking he had seized power. Traoré launched the counterattack, not with bullets but with truth. Ammunition in Dumbier's battalion switched. Radios tapped, soldiers surrounded. And then came the real blow, texts and videos sent to every phone in the country, showing Dumbier's secret deals, offshore bank accounts and promises made to France. His soldiers didn't just hesitate, they turned.
hiding or
The coup
retaliating.
collapsed. Captain Traoré did the unthinkable. He brought Dumbier to the National Stadium not in chains but face to face. No script, no trial, just evidence on a screen and a simple question. When did you decide our nation's freedom could be sold? It wasn't a show of dominance, it was an appeal to conscience. Traoré didn't want blood.
As the dust settled,
He wanted
something
the truth
shifted.
to be undeniable. Citizens rallied not in fear but in unity. Soldiers defected not out of pressure but out of principle. And leaders across West Africa took notice. This was more than a failed coup. It was a message the age of puppets is over. Traoré stood not as a man with power, but as a symbol of what power looks like when it belongs to the people. Burkina Faso had spoken, and the world could no longer ignore
3
it.
days before the
And
tanks
this is
rolled
where
in,
it truly began.
Captain
Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat across from his intelligence chief, Colonel Ouedraogo, in a quiet back room of the presidential wing. The colonel placed a folder on the table, thick-sealed and marked eyes only. He hesitated. Sir, he said, you need of intercepted calls, names, dates recorded.
Traoré
Didn't speak. He
There
didn't
in
black
black.
and white was betrayal of the highest order. General Maurice Dumbier, his chief of defense, his old comrade from the academy, was speaking with foreign agents. French intelligence, to be precise. The recordings were clear. They weren't guessing. Dumbier had promised to roll back Traoré's mining reforms. He had agreed to reopen foreign bases. He had offered them the presidency. In return, they'd offer him money and
Captain
power.
Traoré
Sat in
He didn't
silence.
rage,
He didn't flinch.
because
He already
there
knew.
had
Had been signs, subtle shifts in tone, uncharacteristic absences in meetings, vague justifications for troop movements. But to see it all laid bare was another matter. And here was the most shocking part. Traoré didn't arrest him. He didn't expose him. He didn't even
He did
warn him.
something
No one expected. He waited. And in that decision, that quiet, unspoken calculation, Captain Ibrahim Traoré revealed who he really was, not just a man trying to hold on to power, but a strategist willing to stake everything to reveal the full
didn't
truth.
just
Want to survive
wanted
to
to,
unmask it completely.
because
Sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is letting your enemy walk straight into the light. The call came in the dead of night.
He didn't
Captain
sleep much
Ibrahim
these
Traoré
days.
was already awake. Ever since that folder hit his desk, rest had become a luxury. Trust had become a gamble. And silence.
The voice on the other end
Silence
of the
was now
secure
his
line was
greatest tense
ally.
but calm. Sir, this is Major Sankara. The 3rd Battalion has mobilized. Armored units are moving down Avenue de la Révolution. General Dumbier is leading them.
Captain
It's happening.
Traoré
Didn't panic.
He
He
stood
did at
and
his
run.
bedroom window for just a moment, watching faint headlights slice through the Ouagadougou darkness. He knew those engines. He knew their payloads. And he knew the man sitting in the lead vehicle, a man who once shared his battlefield rations, who once toasted to their vision of a free Burkina Faso. Now that man was
What
coming to
Dumbier
remove
didn't
him from
know
office
was
that
that
Captain
worse.
Ibrahim Traoré had already
After the
vanished.
call ended, at
Traoré
least
activated a hidden panel in his room. Behind it, a narrow stone passage built decades ago, during another era of coups and chaos. Traore moved quickly. No guards, no entourage, just a pistol, a satellite phone at the rear of the palace kitchens. A nondescript sedan waited, blacked-out windows, engine humming. Major Sankara was at the wheel, jaw, clenched eyes darting to every shadow. He drove without speaking. The route was planned weeks earlier. A labyrinth of detours through construction zones, unmarked back roads, and old colonial service lanes, no longer on official maps. Every movement had been rehearsed, just once, at the faint outline of the palace against the dark sky. Not in fear, in resolve. "Report," he said. "They've taken the National Radio Building," Sankara replied, eyes on the road. "Roadblocks are going up. Government ministries are being surrounded, but so far, no resistance."
Traore nodded.
"Most assume it's part of the plan. Appear quiet, appear unbothered.
He had no
Let
idea it was
Dumbier
a
think
trap.
the silence meant weakness." 2 days earlier, under the guise of inventory checks, loyal officers had replaced most of the 3rd Battalion's ammunition with blanks and tampered rounds. Every single communication device they carried compromised. The illusion of control had been handed to Dumbier,
Destination that night,
so it could be shattered. A
from
forgotten
within.
government warehouse on the city's edge. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Inside, it was the true heart of the counter-coup, a hidden operations center outfitted with everything satellite links, command terminals,
The car
encrypted
rolled
to a
servers.
stop. A steel
Inside,
door
the air
creaked
was
open.
tense
But focused. Dozens of officers were already at work. Screens, lit maps, displayed code words exchanged. These were the true loyalists. Not to a man,
Colonel
but to a mission. Greeted him.
Status
Mr. Traore
President.
asked, wasting
Units
no
in
time.
place.
Phase 1 complete. Blanks are in the field. 3rd Battalion has no
Traore
idea.
scanned the wall of
They're
monitors.
rolling in blind. City maps pulsed with movement indicators. Blue for loyalists, red for rebels, and yellow those whose loyalties were still unknown. Phase 2. Ready when you are, Ouedraogo
Traore
replied. Paused. He thought of the people, shopkeepers, students, farmers. They would wake in a few hours to a city that looked calm, but was sitting on a knife's edge. Then we proceed. Because if Captain Ibrahim Traoré had learned anything from history, it was this: coups don't fail because they're loud.
And in that
They
quiet,
fail
beneath
because
the
someone
noise,
stayed
beneath
beneath
the
the betrayal. He was building something far stronger than a defense. He was building the truth. Soon it would be too loud for anyone to ignore. By the time dawn crept over Ouagadougou, General
Seated at
Dumbier,
Captain
Captain Ibrahim
Ibrahim
Traoré's
Traoré
desk,
won.
feet planted firmly on the marble floor of the presidential office, staring out at the courtyard, where his troops patrolled with purpose. The radio station had been seized. The National Guard was silent. Ministries were occupied. The streets were eerily quiet, as if holding their breath. It looked like victory. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that he was surrounded.
Hours earlier,
Not by
as Dumbier's
resistance. Armored
by
convoy
design.
approached the presidential palace. It had felt effortless. Barely a bullet fired. Some guards melted away, others defected. Not one
Mistook it for
sign of
fear.
serious opposition. In truth, it was the
While
calm.
Dumbier
Dumbier
saw
saw
the trap.
himself as the architect of a flawless coup. He was, in fact, the centerpiece of a counter-operation more sophisticated than
Captain
any
Ibrahim
foreign
Traoré
intelligence
wasn't
servant improvising.
anticipated.
He had planned this. 2 days before the first tank rolled, the armories of the 3rd Battalion were quietly visited during a scheduled audit. The audit team officers loyal to Traoré. Ammunition crates were resealed, but not before being switched. Most of the rounds were replaced with
firepower
blanks
remained
or
to
to
maintain
maintain the illusion of readiness, but not enough to survive a confrontation.
precise,
Surgical,
simultaneous.
Simultaneously, their comms units were fitted with tracking signals. The soldiers thought they were operating under secure lines, but everything was being monitored live
6
from
hours
Traoré's
AM,
underground command. The
center.
radio airwaves buzzed with Dumbier's declaration: "The National Committee for Salvation has assumed control
To the
of
untrained
government."
ear,
It sounded
institutions.
authoritative,
But within
firm.
minutes, legitimate.
Citizens began receiving messages
Not
on their
rumors,
phones, not speculation
voice
recordings, wiretaps, screenshots of financial transfers to offshore accounts, meeting transcripts between General Dumbier and French intelligence operatives, photos from hidden cameras showing him entering consulates, receiving envelopes, shaking hands with
Image,
foreign agents.
each
Each word, each number,
They all
undeniable.
had
One thing in common:
across the
betrayal.
city.
Soldiers from the 3rd Battalion stood guard at intersections and checkpoints, following orders they believed were patriotic. But now civilians were approaching with phones raised, showing them images of Dumbier's bank records and whispered promises to sell off Burkina Faso's minds to foreign corporations. The effect was immediate and electric. Troops began asking questions. Others lowered their weapons. Ibrahim Traoré, this wasn't just a military maneuver. It was psychological warfare rooted in truth. Troops from the Loyalist 1st and 4th Battalions had already surrounded the city in silence. They didn't march with banners. They didn't shout orders. They simply moved into position slowly and deliberately, enclosing the 3rd Battalion with discipline and precision. Dumbier's confusion turned to alarm. Why aren't they answering their radios? Why are we short on live rounds? Why are soldiers refusing to fire? Came in like tremors before an earthquake. Communications compromised. Ammo defective. Checkpoints abandoned. Social media flooded with leaks. It wasn't just unraveling, it was imploding. As Dumbier scrambled for control, another call came in, this time from the French embassy. But the line was dead. Their jet, which had landed in anticipation of a swift transition, now sat idle. There was no response from Paris, no signal of support. Only silence. The crowd outside the French embassy was growing. People were printing out the evidence, handing it to soldiers, taping it to embassy gates. General Maurice Dumbier realized the truth. He had walked into a minefield, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré had mapped every inch of it. No ordinary counter-coup. This was a lesson that real power doesn't always fire the first shot. That when armed with truth and patience, a leader can turn bullets into blanks, and silence loyalty dissolved around him. Dumbier saw the final to a man. He had lost to carried that nation's voice, was still watching, still waiting. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had not just survived. By mid-morning, the coup troops had surrendered. Entire battalions laid down their weapons, not because they were outgunned, but because they were outwitted, outmaneuvered. Traoré had given them something more powerful than commands. With the immediate threat he had neutralized, the question on every lip was the same. Many expected swift execution. What would happen to Dumbier? A traitor, after all, deserves no mercy. Others whispered of secret prisons or military tribunals. Captain Traoré chose neither. He did what no one predicted. The nation to witness the reckoning. Came at midday. General Maurice Dumbier would not be silenced. He would be questioned publicly, transparently, in front of the people whose trust he had violated. The National Stadium, a place of celebration, of football, of unity. But today it would become something else entirely. A courtroom without walls, a tribunal without judges, a confrontation not of weapons but behind the stands. The arena was full. Tens of thousands arrived in silence, not to cheer, grand stage, no military fanfare. Stood a simple table with 2 chairs, flanked by 2 screens, showing documents, images, and records. Traoré arrived first in a plain military uniform, no medals, no insignia. He looked not like a man claiming victory, but like a citizen coming to speak on behalf of millions. Then came Dumbier. He was no longer the confident general who had stormed the palace 12 hours earlier. His uniform was creased, his steps slow, and his eyes, once sharp, now darted with uncertainty. Not anger, not applause, just silence. And in that silence, the real trial began. Ibrahim Traoré leaned forward. 15 years, he said quietly, we served together. We fought side by side. We built this transitional government together, letting the words settle. You led soldiers to remove me from office. He didn't accuse. He simply looked his former friend in the eye. Not for me, but for the people. The entire stadium was still stunned. He had expected condemnation, even humiliation. Not this. He took a breath. The path you've chosen, he said, his voice unsteady, it's isolated us. Your rejection of Western aid, your alliances with Russia, your stance on resource control, it's too dangerous. Traoré nodded slightly. And these concerns, he replied, led you to meet with French intelligence, to agree to reverse our mining policies, to accept millions into offshore accounts. Screens flickered to life. Statements, meeting photos, intercepted calls. Speculation. It was your actions, Maurice. Not assumptions, not rumors, just facts. He tried to speak, but the crowd had already seen enough. Traoré turned to the people. I have one question, he said, and I believe our citizens deserve an answer. Turned back to Dumbier. At what point did you decide our sovereignty was negotiable? That foreign companies had more right to our land than our children? That decisions about Burkina Faso's future should be made in Paris, not Ouagadougou? He didn't raise his voice, because he didn't need to. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. You make it sound simple, he said at last, but it's not. Governing isn't idealism, it's survival. We needed their funding, their security. Without it, we collapsed. Traoré answered and called it strategy. He stood facing the stadium. This is what we must understand as a people. The easy path is paved with dependency. It offers comfort, stability, but it robs us of dignity. Paused, then looked back at Dumbier. I believed I was risking too much by standing alone. But I wasn't standing alone. I was standing where our people already were,
And then
You were the line that would echo far beyond the stadium
policy.
walls. This isn't my ideology. It is the will of the people who've had enough.
The crowd didn't erupt.
They rose quietly,
Some
with tears, some with nods, but all with understanding.
Traore hadn't come to punish.
He had come to reveal.
And
In that moment, in front of thousands, Captain Ibrahim Traoré turned a failed coup into a traitor.
Awakening.
It was about reclaiming something far more powerful.
The right to decide.
Burkina Faso had spoken. What happened in that stadium did not stay in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's public questioning of General Dumbier flooded social media. Translations appeared in French, Swahili, Arabic, even Mandarin. In markets and schools and army barracks, screens lit up with the face of a man refusing to be overthrown, not by force, but by a press conference. It was a moment. The world was watching. In Paris, officials scrambled to respond. The French Foreign Ministry issued a vague statement citing rogue elements and unofficial contacts. But the damage was done. The intercepted calls, the secret bank transfers, the video footage, none of it could be denied. France, once the silent hand behind countless post-colonial power plays, had been caught wasn't exposure. It was Traoré's method. No reprisals, no censorship. Delivered calmly, shared publicly,
survived a coup.
Judged collectively. He had dismantled the machinery that made coups possible. The continent, leaders took note. Opposition figures held emergency meetings. In Niger, military officers quietly reviewed their own foreign intelligence contracts. In Chad, protesters gathered outside a European consulate, holding signs that simply read, "We saw what Traore did." Something was shifting. For decades, Africa had been spoken about in boardroom summits
Africa was
and
speaking
for
memos.
itself, and it wasn't asking,
it was
coup.
declaring.
Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before the graduating class at Burkina Faso's military academy. It was a warm morning. The cadets stood in sharp formation boots, dusted from parade drills, faces eager, and not as soldiers, but as sentinels of a new era. Voice. He didn't speak to, he said, is not to a man, not even to a president. It is to the people of Burkina Faso and to their right to decide their future without fear. They understood the weight of what he just said. The lesson wasn't about bullets. It was about belief. That sovereignty isn't something you're given. It's something you defend. Not just in war, but in policy, in contracts, had sent a signal far beyond Africa's borders. The era of silence that even a landlocked country, poor in money, but rich in courage, could face down the full force of foreign influence with clarity, conviction, and an unshakable connection to the will of its people. Of course, there were consequences. Western powers began tightening economic levers. Aid packages were suddenly under review. Invitations to international forums quietly disappeared. Editorials warned of isolationism and Russian influence. The usual script. But Traore didn't flinch. Because for once, the story wasn't being written in Washington or Brussels. It was being written in Ouagadougou. That frightened the old order more than any revolution ever could. Change was tangible. People began organizing local councils to review mining contracts. Community radios broadcast legal rights information. Women's groups pushed for land ownership protections. Civil servants refused to sign deals they had as if the air itself had changed. The people weren't waiting for politicians. Behind it all, they were moving quietly, persistently. Captain Ibrahim Traoré continued his work, not as a ruler sitting on a throne, but as a guardian walking emerged from the stadium taken just before the public questioning. It's not dramatic. Traoré is sitting, elbows on the table, hands folded, head bowed, looking at the crowd. He's not speaking. You can see it in his eyes. He's not thinking about Dumbier. He's thinking about what comes next. Defending the nation wasn't the final beginning. It didn't end in the stadium. Truth never ends in silence. Captain Ibrahim Traoré began that day was not just the collapse of a coup. It was the rise of something else, something deeper, something permanent. Not in palaces, but in Africa has been treated like a pawn on someone else's board. Played, traded, sacrificed, all in the name of development. A nation can but what Traoré showed still not be bought. A leader can be young and still not be blind. A people can be patient but only for changed. But not just in Burkina Faso. Feel it ripple through the continent. The words sovereignty, dignity, accountability were no longer academic. They were living, breathing demands echoing through villages, cities, parliaments. Some with admiration, some with fear. Because Captain Ibrahim Traoré had done the unthinkable, he had told the truth and survived. Survival was never the goal. It wasn't about one man keeping power. It was about every citizen remembering they already declare himself a hero. He went back to work, visited schools, sat with mothers in rural towns. He knew the real revolution was not on the contracts, in courtrooms, in classrooms, in how a country chooses to live and who it chooses to trust. Weapons had gone quiet. Now the work began. There will be more attempts that pull the curtain back on empire without consequence. But Traore is ready.
Because once you've
His
seen
people
betrayal
masked as friendship,
Once
you
you've
don't
reclaimed
your voice, you don't give it back.
So if you're reading
If
this,
you've ever felt your country was being steered by
ever wondered
invisible
what
what
it
it looks
looks
like when ordinary people rise behind an extraordinary idea, this story is also yours. Remember it, share it. And if you ever feel alone in the fight for justice,
Somewhere
look
a
again.
small nation is
And then
standing
its heart
tall.
is a captain who refused to kneel. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall in the face of global giants, if you believe Africa deserves to write its own story in its own voice, not through the mouths of those who once claimed to own it, if you've seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt it burn something awake inside you, then this story belongs to you.